All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I have you all muted right now. We're going to try to have a little bit of question time at the end. So if you have any questions, I have Jack monitoring the chat box there. Feel free to throw a question up in there as we get closer to the end, and I'd be happy to try to answer them. So this is our spring sports webinar. It's specifically designed for coaches. It's part of our coaches campaign that we've had going on all year. It came out of the fact that we had 500 plus forfeits in the NAIA last year, which is way too many. So, and every single one of them could have been avoided. And so as a former coach myself, not that that matters, I know how hard you guys work to get even one victory, and having to give those wins back because of something that was avoidable is extremely unfortunate. And so Legislative Services decided that we were going to try to target you guys a little bit more directly than maybe we have in the past. So we've done that a couple different ways. We've created collateral, a couple of different brochures and stuff to be handed out at showcases and coaches conventions and conference conventions. We've done sports-specific webinars or Facebook Lives. So hopefully you guys have seen some of those. Those are available on our Facebook page, the Play NAIA Facebook page. And then we've also done these season-specific webinars. So without further ado, I'm going to get rolling here. Just to introduce myself, I'm Lindsey Thompson. I'm the manager of Legislative Services. I have Jack in here with me today. He's our intern for the year. So we're going to get rolling here. I'm going to go through some of the first stuff kind of quick because it's at this stage of the year, it's a little bit older, but I still think it's important. And like I said, feel free to throw your comments up in the chat box there. If something comes up that was confusing, feel free to throw it in there and we can try to answer it in real time. But for any kind of hypotheticals or specific instances, try to wait till the end. So, all right, here we go. If my slide will advance. All right, there we go. All right, so this is a quick glossary. Some of the stuff that I say, TOA, SOC, this is just kind of letting you guys know what those different terms mean. I will also say that I'm recording this, so I will be able to put it up onto your guys' individual coaches' corners on the website. So, speaking of the website, getting into that right now, I know that it's you guys have seen it, obviously, hopefully now, but it is new, so I just want to show a couple different things with the website. So this is what the home page looks like right now, and if you look up in the top right corner, there's a For Members button. So if you click that, it'll take you to this page, and down on the right side in the blue box, you'll see the Legislative Services. You'll see Legislative Services. You can go ahead and click that, which takes you to Legislative Services homepage. So this isn't exactly what it looks like today, but this is a good representation. So this is the Legislative Services homepage. As you can see in that blue box over there on the right side, you'll be able to find a lot of different things from our legislative forms, which is where our hardship request certificates are located, as well as any forfeit requests and requests for exceptions. You'll find all those in the legislative forms section over there. Rules education, this is where we'll put this PowerPoint up, but we'll also put it someplace. We'll also put it on your coach's corner. The next thing I wanted to show you is if you sign up for the NAIA e-News, that top green box on the right side, if you click on that, you'll have the ability to choose several different emails that you can get as news unfolds. So you can do your specific sport, but you can also do legislative services. So every 2 weeks, we do a brief, a legislative brief. As you can see here, the one that we talked about whenever I took this screenshot was Season of Competition. So they're quick briefs, quick reads, but they're stuff that is either a hot topic or something that's changed. So this new legislation is a good example of that. And then we also do a corresponding Facebook Live every other Tuesday at noon, where we break it down a little bit more. And again, that's on the Play NAIA Facebook page. So what you can do is, if you sign up for the NAIA e-news, you can get those legislative briefs in your email. So I know you guys got a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to remember what Tuesdays we're doing them, but you can get them directly in your email. They'll come in the morning before the brief, or as the brief is posted, and then kind of remind you guys to check out the Facebook Live at noon. So you can find all of our past briefs and anything that you guys want to find on that legislative homepage. All right. So new legislation. I know that some of this stuff has been in place for a while now, since the last convention, but I still think it's important to go through this with some of you guys, just to make sure that you guys are all aware of what the major changes from last year to this year as you guys move into the season. So the first one is the freshman eligibility and the ACT-SAT score. So I got a box on the next page that's a little bit easier to read than this, but just to give you a brief background, the SAT changed their scoring a couple years ago. We kind of had to go into emergency mode for a few years while we tried to figure out what was an appropriate, what ACT score matched up with an SAT score. They had to do a lot of studies and everything to get those numbers, and those numbers came out this summer, I believe. And so we passed this new ACT-SAT score at the National Convention last year, but it actually goes into effect May 1st of this year, so May 1st, 2019. So this will affect incoming freshmen for the 19-20 season. So an easy way to look at this is if a student took the ACT or the SAT before March 1st, 2016, they're going to have an 18 on the ACT or an 860 on the SAT. So that's the old score. It doesn't matter when they get the grade or when they get the score. It doesn't matter when they come to school. It only matters when they actually took the ACT or the SAT. So between March 1st, 2016 and May 1st, 2019, this is when we were kind of in that emergency mode. The ACT score dropped down to a 16, and the SAT score stayed the same at an 860. That was the initial response that we got from the committees, that those would probably match up. In the meantime, they were doing all of these different studies. So after May 1st of 2019, the ACT score is going to rise back up to 18. The SAT score is going to be 970. So if you guys are recruiting anybody right now and they're on that kind of borderline of if they're going to be eligible or if they're not going to be eligible, you might want to encourage them to take the ACT or the SAT as soon as possible, because after that May 1st date hits, any test taken after that is going to be an 18 or a 970. So just something to keep in mind as you guys are out there on the recruiting trail. Second thing that was changed was the membership amended the season of competition bylaws. So here the highlighted portions are what's new. I went ahead and left in what it previously said, just so you guys have an idea, and that's what's marked out there. So what's new here is it says the NAIA shall take at face value seasons of competition based on non-collegiate participation as assessed. So we changed it, the membership changed it from charged to as assessed by another intercollegiate athletic association, and including a determination of unattached status. So prior to this, if a student was in the NCAA and they ran unattached, we would take, if the NCAA didn't charge them a season of competition for that unattached, we would still review it for a potential outside competitive experience. So now, if the NAIA or if the NCAA or NJCAA says the student met unattached, they would not be charged a season of competition because of that unattached status. We're going to take that at face value. Period. End of story. This makes sense. This gets everything kind of on the same page. But I will say, and we're going to get into this in just a second, but it requires that previous athletic association make an affirmative decision. If they don't have an opinion, if they make no opinion whether the student would be charged or not charged, then we would go ahead and apply our evaluative criteria to determine if that student should be charged a season of competition for that non-intercollegiate competition, all right, or non-collegiate participation. So for all you, for the track guys out there, wrestling, the unattached criteria changed again. We went from 7 down to 5 criteria, took out some stuff that frankly needed to be taken out, and then added a couple of new things. So previously it said a coach or a representative of the athletic department does not enter the student for the event. The membership went ahead and added or pay the student's entry fee for the event. So reason being that the act of paying for the student's entry fee is signing that student up for the event. So that would be entering them into the event. So it's just something to keep in mind. You got students that want to compete unattached this spring. They're going to have to pay their own way and enter themselves, physically enter themselves into that competition in order to meet the first criteria of the unattached competition. We removed and when I say we, I'm talking about the membership. We removed the second criteria, which said that they couldn't provide meals or housing. That makes sense. So those unattached kids, they can now travel with you. They can stay in the hotel with you. They can eat with you guys. That's not going to be a violation of the unattached criteria. The not wearing institutional uniform or name is still the same. We also removed the athletic insurance. Once again, this makes sense. The kids can compete, and if they do suffer an injury, your insurance can still cover them and take care of them. I'm really glad that we got rid of that criteria, because I think that obviously safety and the well-being of our student athletes is at the forefront. So we took out those two there, 4 and 5. So 3 and 4 remain the same, and then number 5 is the big one. So number 5 is an identified member of the coaching staff cannot or does not provide coaching, evaluation, and/or feedback to the student on site and/or for the duration of the event. So the reason why the duration of the event is in there is that we wanted to avoid the potential loophole of coaches maybe taking a kid across the street to a gas station or something and providing some feedback. Now, does this mean you can't watch your unattached kids participate? No, it doesn't mean you have to shield your eyes. You can still watch them participate. You can take notes. All that's fine. You just can't provide coaching, evaluation, and/or feedback to the student on site and/or for the duration of the event. So we're going to do some case studies here and kind of go through those to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page. But one thing to remember with multi-day events, so a track meet that's taking place over a weekend, if a student competes on Saturday and then you're back at the hotel that night, you still would be prohibited. If you want the student to meet the unattached criteria, you'd still be prohibited from providing coaching and/or feedback and/or evaluation even after the event's over for that day, because it's a multi-day event. The duration would extend through the night and into the actual completion of the entire event. And it doesn't matter if the student doesn't have any more events in that meet. It's for the duration of the entire event. So just something to keep in mind while you guys are trying to make sure that your unattached kids are going to meet that unattached criteria. The last thing, this has been in place, is the second year this has been in place, but in order to meet this, all students that are trying to meet unattached have to be academically and athletically eligible for intercollegiate competition in accordance with our applicable NAIA regulations, as well as the conference and institution. So this means part of our bylaws is that every single kid that's going to compete has to be certified as eligible through the ECP software. So it's not good enough just that the kid got an eligible decision from the eligibility center. They also have to be certified in order to meet number 4 there of the unattached criteria bylaw. All right, case question number 1. EJ is an NJCAA athlete and runs unattached for the junior college rules in the fall of 2018. When he transfers to an NAIA school for the fall of 2019, or for the fall of 2018, when he transfers for the fall of 2019, the NJCAA does not charge him for his fall of 2018 participation due to the fact that he met their unattached rule. So now EJ's coming through the NAIA Eligibility Center. How will they rule on the 2018 fall competition? So just focus on that 2018 season. I mean, this is the bylaw again, just so you guys can see it. They're going to take it at face value as assessed, including the determination of unattached status. So the answer is pretty easy. The Eligibility Center will take that affirmative decision by the Junior College Athletic Association at face value and would not charge EJ with the season of competition. Prior to this change, the Eligibility Center would have done a competitive experience review, and EJ could have been charged. So, again, I just want to make sure you guys understand this, that the Intercollegiate Association has to make an affirmative decision for the NAIA to take it at face value. In the above scenario, if in the above scenario the NJCAA had no opinion on unattached, then the Eligibility Center would have to do a competitive experience review for that student, and thus opening themselves up to being charged. All right. So here's the unattached criteria again as we prepare for case question number 2. Remember the duration of the event and coaching evaluation and/or feedback. All right. So Danielle wants to compete unattached at an upcoming meet, but is strapped for cash. She approaches her coach and asks her coach to pay for her entry fee. The coach does so, and before the event, Danielle pays back her Danielle pays back her coach. Would she still meet the unattached criteria? This was a FAQ that we put to the submitting sponsor of this new change to the unattached criteria bylaw, and they ruled that no, even if Danielle was to reimburse her coach, the act of paying her entry fee would be entering her in the event, and therefore the coach's action would violate the first criteria of the exception. So just, we hear a lot, we've all been college kids before, we know how strapped you can be with cash. Unfortunately, from the sponsor that brought forth that legislation change, if a school was to pay for a kid's entry fee, the kid pay the school back, unfortunately that would not meet the unattached criteria, and therefore that student would be opening themselves up to potentially being charged. All right, the second thing, this is something that I guess hadn't been brought up before until last year, but we got a lot of questions on this, and it spurred this change here. So the frequency of play and contest designation. So down there at the bottom, the red is the new part of the bylaw. The rest of the bylaws remains the same. But what it says is for a contest of any kind, a scrimmage, an exhibition, a game, meet, etc., whatever it is, once the contest has commenced, the designation of the type of contest will be officially recorded as such, and the designation cannot be changed retroactively. So what happened a couple times last year was a team had a game designated as an exhibition and were potentially playing maybe an NCAA Division I school. They went in there and worked that D1 school and got a win. Retroactively, the coach and the school asked, well, hey, can we switch this to a countable game now? We'd like to count that towards our stats, count that towards our record. And last year, that was allowable. So last year, I'm talking about 2017, 2018. But for the 2018-19 season and moving forward, once those games start, they cannot be changed. So once those games start, the designation cannot be changed. Just something to keep in mind. So an example here, Kaiser's going to play Florida State in soccer. Kaiser wants to consider the game countable and will use the stats from the game. Florida State's going to consider the game an exhibition, and under the new bylaw change, is this allowed? So here it is again, and as you might notice, there's nothing in there that says that both teams have to have the same designation. Now, I will point out that NAIA versus NAIA, the way our bylaws are written for scrimmages, exhibitions, and games and meets and countable contests, all that sort of stuff, the NAIA teams will always be the same. So this really only applies when you're playing junior colleges or NCAA teams. Those NAIA team playing NAIA team, both of those teams have to designate it as the same just per the way our bylaws are written. It's impossible for them to have different things. But in this scenario, this is perfectly allowable. So just as a refresher, Kaiser was playing Florida State, an NCAA school. Florida State wanted to call it an exhibition. Kaiser wanted to call it a countable game and use it for their stats and everything. This is fine. But what's not allowed is if Kaiser wanted to change this designation after the fact, right? So they couldn't switch it. They lost to Florida State. They couldn't switch it back to an exhibition or a scrimmage. It would have to remain the same as that countable game. So, and just a little caveat here, I always like to point out, if for some reason you're playing a scrimmage or something and you've made some sort of agreement with the team that you're scrimmaging that, maybe it's baseball and you're going to have unlimited re-entries, or you're going to play 21 innings or something like that, and that'll count as one game, you still have to adhere to the proper sport rules in order for the game to be countable. So I'm probably making that a little bit more convoluted than I need to. It certainly makes sense for a game to be countable. It has to follow the proper NAIA sports rules. So the next big change was our transfer residency requirements. So what was happening was schools were requesting a release for a transfer student from their previous four-year institution. And for whatever reason, maybe the previous four-year institution wasn't responding. And so what this did was it kind of put the kid and the school in limbo on if that residency release was going to be granted or not. And if the school never responded, there was really nothing that you guys could do to kind of put your mind at ease and know if that kid was going to be eligible to play immediately or not. So what the new exception is, if a student's NAIA school requests a written release from the student's previous four-year institution, and the previous institution does not respond to the request within 30 days, the written release will be deemed automatically approved. So this is good, right? So if you don't hear back for whatever reason, then you're going to have to, and those 30 days elapsed, you can just go ahead and consider that kid released and move forward, as long as they also have the 2.0, obviously. So to satisfy this requirement, the NAIA institution request must be made via email and directed to the previous four-year institution's athletic director, associate's athletic director, and/or compliance officer, including as many of these individuals as possible. So it has to be in an email. It has to be clear. You can't write it in Japanese or something like that and try to trick them into not responding. It has to be, clear and obvious what you're asking, and you have to include as many people as possible. Do you have to prove receipt? No. You just have to prove that you sent it. We're not going to ask you guys to send it certified mail or anything like that. Just have to be able to prove that you sent it if you're ever challenged on it. Another thing about this is once that 30-day window closes, it's closed. So if a four-year school responds on the 31st day and denies the release, it doesn't matter anymore. That kid's been released per our rules, this new rule. Once that 30-day window expires, the kid is automatically deemed released. Now, if they respond within those 30 days and deny the release, then clearly that kid would not be released and would have to serve that residency requirement. So, case question number 4. Duffy transfers to Midway for the 2018 fall after competing at a different four-year institution in basketball the previous 2 years. Midway AD requests a release from Duffy's previous AD on August 1st, 2018. The athletic director responds and denies the release on September 13th, 2018. Does Duffy have to sit residency? No, right? We just talked about this. As long as the AD requested the release properly and sent it to Duffy's previous AD, assistant AD, and/or compliance officer, once that 30 days expires, so in that instance it would be August 30th, I believe, or 31st. I'm not all up to date on my months right now, but once that 30-day window closes, the kid is deemed released. All right. So, moving on to recruitment here. This is in Article 2, Section C, and Article 2, Section D. High school students, you guys can contact any prospective students once they begin high school. So, unfortunately, you guys can't be contacting, an 11-year-old and making them offers or anything like that. They have to actually have begun their high school. But once they begin their high school, you guys can contact them all you want. You can text them, you can tweet them, you can call them, whatever you want to do, you can do that throughout their entire high school career. Junior college students, contact is allowed at the conclusion of the academic year in which the student participates in their first season of competition. So the way it's written right now, if a student competed in the fall and then took off the spring, you would still have to wait until the end of that academic year. So even though that student's not in school in the spring, you would still have to wait until the end of that academic year. Now, if that student contacts you directly, and I'm going to get into this here in just a second, but if that student contacts you directly, you can communicate with them as long as notification is provided in writing from the AD, FAR to the previous institution's AD or FAR within 10 days of the contact. You have to provide that notification in writing, all right? So graduate school students, contact is allowed to graduate students the day after the student graduates or completes all requirements of their undergraduate degree, whichever is later. So if a kid maybe kleps out of his final course that he needs at the beginning of the spring semester, so he's done with his requirements of his undergraduate degree, you would still have to wait until the day after the student graduates because that's the later date, correct? So and vice versa. So if a kid graduates let's say he graduates in December, but he still has to take one online class in the spring, you would have to wait until the end of that online class in order to contact that student about transferring to you guys as a graduate student, excuse me. So providing notification, this is Article 2, Section D. You must notify within 10 days following the first contact, and if contacted by a student-athlete who is enrolled at another institution of higher learning. So this means a junior college or a four-year school. You still have to reach back out and let the AD know, AD and FAR, that you were contacted by this student. Now, the way the bylaw is written right now, maybe this will change in the future, but the way the bylaw is written right now, it doesn't require that the student be an athlete at that other institution of higher learning. So if some kid wanted to go to, big state school and be in a frat, and you recruited him out of high school, technically, if he reaches out to you once he's at big state school and wants to come to your NAIA school, you would still have to contact the AD and the FAR at that previous school to let them know that he contacted you. Now, what are they going to do with that? They're probably going to, shake their head and be like, I don't know who this kid even is. But for our bylaws, you are required to do that. So, a coach or a representative of a member institution shall not initiate contact with an enrolled student-athlete or someone that's drawn equipment. So drawing equipment doesn't really apply to the spring sports, but it's more of a soccer or potentially a football type of situation. So drawing equipment is just basically starting to practice, being issued gear, that sort of thing. You cannot initiate contact with that student. Now, we recently had a situation where a four-year school, an NCAA school coach, reached out to an NAIA coach and gave that coach one of the NCAA students' numbers. So in that scenario, what happened was the NAIA coach contacted that kid directly. That's a violation. You cannot contact these kids directly unless they contact you first or those previous things with the junior college and the graduate students have been met. So just hearing from the coach and getting the kid's number and getting the coach's blessing to call him, that's not enough. That kid still has to initiate contact. So if you are talking to another coach, you just need to tell them, hey, have the kid call me. Per the NAIA rules, he has to contact me first, and then I can talk to him. A release provided by a student does not negate the requirement for notification. We're going to get into this a little bit more on down the road about the transfer portal. But if a student goes to their NCAA school, for example, wants a release, the school gives them that release and allows them to start pursuing other opportunities, and he contacts you, you would still have to reach back out to the NCAA school and let them know that he contacted you. So the release does not negate the notification requirement. Now, the exceptions, as we mentioned before, student has graduated and earned a baccalaureate degree, or if a student is enrolled at a two-year institution after completion of their academic year in which they finished their first SOC, at that point you guys can contact them at will. So here's a case question for you guys. JJ wants to transfer from his NAIA school and has let his current institution know. At his request, his current athletic director issues him a blanket release statement that would allow him to compete immediately. JJ contacts you, a coach, and when you notify him that you cannot speak to him without notifying his current institution, he supplies the release letter. Do you still have to contact and provide notification to his former institution? Yes. As is what we just talked about. This type of release could be used to meet the residency exception, but it does not negate your duty to contact his former institution, right? So we get a lot of questions on this. Kid calls me, what can I say to him before I need to hang up and get off the phone and provide notification? You can ask him, hey, what's going on? You can figure out the situation, ask him if he's identified, those sorts of things, really general questions. But as soon as you find out that he's identified, you just need to say, hey, man, I need to provide notification. Once I provide that notification, I'll give you a call back. And once you provide that notification, you can reach back out immediately and talk to the kid and get into the nitty-gritty of trying to get him to your institution. So transfer and prospective students. A transfer student is a student who becomes identified with an NAIA institution after having previously been identified with a 2-year or a 4-year institution of higher learning. This does not include being identified while in high school in a high school dual enrollment program. So if a kid, a lot of times out in Kansas now, and I think in other parts of the country, kids are graduating from high school with 65 credits and 100 credits from a local junior college or a local 4-year school. That doesn't mean they're identified. You can't identify until you're fully out of high school. So those kids would not be transfer students. Those would be incoming freshmen. So you wouldn't have to, you wouldn't have to provide notification, and they wouldn't meet the transfer student definition. So anybody that meets this transfer student definition, you guys have to do a transfer player eligibility statement through ECP. So whoever your data entry person is, your FAR, your registrar, whoever it may be, has to do that transfer player eligibility statement before the student actually competes for you guys. So just keep that in mind. So a prospective student is someone it's a prospective student remains a prospective student until they meet the definition of identification, right? So a prospective student must identify first with an institution in order to practice and compete with an institution's team during the summer. So May 16th to July 31st. And they also have to be identified prior to practicing and competing prior to the start of the institution's academic term or between regular academic terms. So let's say you guys, you guys are practicing in the fall. There's a kid on campus that's part-time. He's never been identified at your institution. Can he practice with your institution? No, he's still a prospective student, right? So that student cannot practice with you guys. Let's look at it the other way. Kid is identified with you guys in the spring of 18. To save a term of attendance, he goes part-time in the fall of 18. Can that student practice then? Yes, he's no longer a prospective student. He's been identified at your institution. He can practice even though he's going part-time. You might want to double-check with your insurance companies and your on-campus policy with that. But per our rules, that student can practice. They cannot compete, obviously, because of the 12-hour enrollment rule, but they can practice because they're no longer considered a prospective student. So identification, hopefully you guys know this, but identification is being enrolled in 12 or more institutional credit hours or representing an intercollegiate school in an intercollegiate competition. That would also identify them with that institution. So the progress rule for transfers. First term of identification, you take in all past transcripts at face value. You want to check for institutional credit hours and not just the cumulative total, right? So you're going to have to sit down. Hopefully your registrar is adept at this, but you have to sit down and go through and make sure they meet our institutional credit definition. And you can't just look at the bottom line and say, oh, he earned 110 hours at his previous school, we're all good. You got to make sure that all 110 of those previous hours would meet institutional credit or determine which hours would meet the institutional credit to determine if the kid's going to meet the progress rule. So the second term of identification, this is something that causes a lot of headaches, and it affects you guys as spring sports coaches more than anybody else because you guys, especially if the kid's identified in the fall, and then maybe he transfers to you guys in the fall, he identifies with you, and your institution doesn't accept the majority or even any of his institutional credits. Unfortunately, the bylaw right now says you have to go off of what's on your guys' official institutional transcript. So I always kind of give the example of UBC, but there's a lot of other ones they don't accept any transfer hours, or generally they don't accept any transfer hours. So for baseball, and I got a lot of questions about this from UBC last year, for baseball, if those kids are identified in the fall, all their previous hours are wiped out. Unfortunately, that kid probably isn't going to meet the progress rule if they have previous seasons of competition. So it's something that you're going to have to keep in the back of your mind, and try to work with your registrar and FAR to plan for in the future. So if you know that a kid's going to lose half of his credits because you guys aren't going to accept them, you're going to need to figure out a way for that kid to make up those hours starting with the second term of identification so that they can meet the progress rule. So that's my tip. Think ahead to prevent problems from loss of hours. This is something that is a hot topic. I haven't had a chance to look at all the legislation proposals yet for this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that could potentially be changed. But this is the way it is right now, and for the foreseeable future. All right, so 24 36-hour rule and tricks of the trade. So the timing of the credits. The credits must be earned prior to the term in which the student wishes to compete. So you cannot use a mini course within a term of attendance to earn eligibility. So a good example here is you have a baseball player. He doesn't meet the 24 36-hour rule. You enroll him in a you guys have an 8-week course or something like that to try to get him eligible. Can he use those hours earned in that 8-week course within the spring semester? No. The hours have to be earned prior to that semester in which he wishes to become eligible. Okay? You cannot use summer credits if the credits are earned prior to the first of the 2 terms of attendance. So the example here is kid identifies with you guys spring or fall of 18 or fall of 17, spring of 18, you couldn't use hours that he earned in the summer of 18, right? So you couldn't use those hours from the summer of 18. They have to be earned in between or after that first term of attendance, all right? So if credits are transferred in, then those credits must be applied to the term of which the official transcript designates. So you have a kid not going to be eligible this spring, you get him in at a junior college, and the junior college swears up and down it's going to show up on their transcript as a winter credit. You get the official transcript, it says a spring credit. You would not be able to use those hours for that kid to be eligible in the spring. So I'm going to finish this slide and then I'll get to that question in there. So summer credits, non-identified student in summer classes. So if a prospective student who is never identified with your institution or wasn't identified immediately prior may use all prior institutional credits taken at face value, even if your institution does not accept the credit, right? So identified student in summer classes, continuously identified students who enroll in summer classes outside of their institution and earn institutional credit not accepted by your institution cannot use those credits towards the 24 36-hour rule. So same thing with winter courses and like those interterm, intersession classes, whatever you guys call them on campus. If the kid's been identified, you guys have to officially accept those credits in order to use them for eligibility. Non-identified student, somebody that hasn't been identified with you, you're going to take that at face value for that term, right? So the question here, an NAIA coach asked a junior college coach about a player during the season. The junior college coach tells his player to call the NAIA coach. The player initiates the first contact. Can the NAIA coach freely contact the player in the future without the player always initiating contact? That's an excellent question. And the answer there is yes, once you provide notification. So even if you know the coach is aware of it, you still have to provide notification. We just want to cover all of our bases. But yes, once you provide that notification, you can contact that student freely and at will once that notification has been provided. So that's a really good question. Thank you very much. So transfer portal. So this is new. This was rolled out by the Division I committee or whatever they call it, the NCAA. It's rolled out in October of this past year. And basically what it says, and I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about this, is that any Division I athlete that informs their school of an intention to transfer will be entered into the portal, and it's visible to all other NCAA schools. And I think it's all NCAA schools. It's definitely Division I schools. And the NCAA through the grapevine, I've heard that the NCAA has stated that non-NCAA schools will not have access to this transfer portal. So what does this mean in regards to our recruiting rules? We wrote a brief on this recently. Jack and I did a Facebook Live on the same topic. That's available on our legislative page where we go in a little bit more detail. But basically this means nothing for our rules. The fact that a kid's on the transfer portal, the fact that the school knows that he is intending to transfer, it doesn't affect our bylaws. So if you become aware of a student on the transfer portal, you still cannot contact them directly, right? Unless they meet the junior college, well, not the junior college, but unless they're going to graduate. Once they graduate, then you can contact them, obviously. If a student contacts you and they're on the portal and you're aware they're on the portal, you still have to provide notification to their previous school within 10 days. The fact that they're on the portal does not negate the notification requirement from our NAIA, from the NAIA bylaws, right? And then the last part, if the student does transfer to you after being on the portal, they still must serve residency or meet the exception. Now that is if they competed. Obviously, if a kid, went to Penn State or something and redshirted, didn't actually compete, then they contact you. You'd still have to provide notification, but the release requirement wouldn't be there since they didn't compete at their immediate previous four-year school. But you still would have to get the release for those kids that have competed, even though they were on the transfer portal. So like I said, we broke this down a little bit more in depth in our brief. I'd go check that out. It's available on the website. So the transfer portal, it's a cool tool that the NCAA has kind of rolled out, but for our purposes, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't affect our bylaws at all. If you become aware of a kid in the transfer portal, you're going to kind of want to approach it the same way as I mentioned with the recruiting bylaw a minute ago. You're going to want to probably call that coach, tell that coach, hey, we're interested in Joe Schmo. Can you have him contact me if he is also interested in maybe coming to the NAIA school? So that's the way that you would have to initiate that contact. You cannot call that kid directly, even if he is on the transfer portal. All right? So some odds and ends here, and then we'll try to get to some questions if anybody has any. So interterm and recertification. So you guys do play a role in the recertification and in the ECP. You guys get those emails. You guys have to sign off on it. A lot of times our coaches are aware and more up to date on certain issues with a student than maybe the FAR or registrar, just because the FAR and registrar has to deal with all student athletes on campus, whereas you guys are dealing with your team. So remember, you guys got to sign off on that. It's your opportunity to go through and make sure everything's correct. So with interterms, there's three options. So they can either stand alone, which is the default option. So if your school's never designated how you want your interterm to lie in the calendar, then it's going to be standalone if you have an interterm. If you don't have an interterm, don't worry about this, right? So if it's standalone, that means the interterm is not attached to a term of attendance. So it's not attached to the fall or the spring. So what you have to do is you have to recertify at the end of the fall term. So you guys played some baseball. Games in the fall. Everybody was certified and eligible. Then the fall ends. Let's say randomly you guys had a game over during the interterm. You're going to have to recertify for that interterm. And then you'd have to recertify at the end of the interterm for the spring semester. The second option is if you could attach it to the first term. So if you attach it to the first term, so basically what it does is it extends the fall semester through the interterm. So ineligible fall students cannot gain eligibility until the end of the interterm, and vice versa. Eligible students will maintain their eligibility through the interterm, and then once the interterm ends, then they would become ineligible if they are going to be ineligible. So ineligible students cannot gain eligibility until the end of the interterm. Eligible students will maintain eligibility through the interterm. Then your school would have to certify them at the end of the interterm for the spring term. The last one, this is rare, we don't see this very often, but if it attaches to the spring term, so you would have to recertify at the end of the fall term for the spring term before the interterm would start. Your FAR and registrar, we talked to them a lot about this, so you should be up to date on how all this works. But students who become ineligible at the fall term cannot gain eligibility until the end of the spring term. And I think that's one reason why we don't see this very often, where it attaches to the spring term. So if a kid becomes ineligible at the end of the fall term, they cannot use the interterm to become eligible since you guys connected it to the spring term. So basically it extends the spring term back to the beginning of the intersession, right? And vice versa, kids that are maybe ineligible for the fall term were ineligible for the fall term, they can gain eligibility and begin to compete as soon as that fall term is over and compete through the interterm as long as they're eligible through the spring term. All right? So this is our outside competition elite level criteria flowchart. This is on our website. I don't expect you guys to be able to break this all down. It looks like an absolute bear. I promise you it's not. I'm looking at, I'm talking specifically to golf coaches right now, wrestling coaches, and track coaches, any other individual sports. I'm leaving out, I apologize. But those are the big ones. So as you work your way down through this flow chart, you can get a pretty good idea, and it's not a definitive answer, but it's a pretty good idea if your student's going to be charged this season of competition for outside competition, if it's going to meet the elite level criteria. So participation in outside leagues are dependent on a few factors. Was the student athlete charged this season of competition within the previous 12-month window? So remember, if a kid's charged a season of competition and then competes in elite level criteria within a 12-month window of that same intercollegiate season, they would all roll together. And then you'd have to wonder, is the student continuously identified? This is all in the flow chart. If they're continuously identified, then they probably, that elite level criteria, or outside competition will probably not be charged. Once again, probably. And then you have to determine if the league or the event was chargeable an elite level. Now, the EC, the Eligibility Center, are the experts on the elite level criteria. I'm sure everybody's had issues with this before, and maybe some bones to pick with them, but they're the experts here. So one thing that we see, I talked to a baseball student athlete yesterday. Situation was the kid took a year off. He took off 16-17, played in the summer of 17, went to NJCAA school for the 17-18 school year and didn't play, so he got redshirted. What happened then was that summer of 17 competition, and like it or not, and I think that a lot of people probably don't, but like it or not, that summer competition is a standalone season of competition because there's no intercollegiate season to connect it to. So we have different kind of graphs and infographics on the website to kind of break this down a little bit more so you guys can keep everything in mind. But those kids that redshirt and don't participate for you guys, you're going to want to be kind of careful about sending them off to summer leagues if you anticipate maybe that they might not play for you again the next year, or if they're at a risk for injury, thinking about pitchers and Tommy John, some injury that's going to knock them out for over a year. That summer competition can stand alone and be charged the season of competition for that student. So transfers and suspensions. This is in Article V, Section D, Item 6, and VF6. So if they were dismissed or suspended for any reason, including an athletic department policy, the student must sit 2 semesters or 3/4 of residency at the NAIA school or fulfill the terms of the original suspension, right? So if a kid gets expelled from a school based off of a rule that applies to either the entire athletic department or the entire student body, that student's going to have to serve that expulsion at their NAIA school. They can't get away from that suspension by just coming to the NAIA and trying to become eligible immediately. The other thing is the fulfilled terms. So last year we had a kid, he's a football player, he was transferring from an NCAA school. He'd been expelled from this school, and he was expelled until he showed them that he had taken an anger management course, had some drug counseling, and passed a drug test. So once he did all those 3 things, the NAIA school confirmed with the NCAA school that, hey, if he does all 3 of these things, would he be eligible to go back to your school? The NCAA school said yes. The NAIA school then was able to get the kid into those three things, got a drug test, drug counseling, anger management. They provided the documentation of those classes and that test back to the NCAA school. The NCAA school wrote them a letter. Yes, we determined that this suspension, the terms of the suspension have been met. Therefore, that kid was eligible immediately. So transfer suspension is not required if the suspension was academic, but the student athlete met NAIA rules at the time of the expulsion or the suspension, and the student athlete has not played college sports for 1 calendar year from suspension. So the difference here between this one is if let's say you guys require that all students have a 3.0 in order to maintain in good standing at your institution. So kid drops below a 3.0, he's got a 2.5, you guys expel him, right? So that kid, let's just say he meets all other NAIA eligibility requirements, and you guys just suspended him for your own personal academic rule that was more stringent than the NAIA rule. What this kid can do is he doesn't have to serve residency. So serving residency basically is going to charge that kid 2 terms of attendance. So in this case, this kid could just take off a year, not burn those terms of attendance, and then be able to come back after that and compete. So that's the difference there. So if they're suspended, let's say they get, a DUI on campus, they're expelled, the kid's going to have to serve residency. The kid gets kicked out for the GPA requirement, like I just said, but they met eligibility requirements for the NAIA. That kid could go part-time at your school. Now, can he practice? No. But he can go part-time at your school, build up his hours, and not burn a term of attendance. The second one is suspended for a team rule or a coach rule. So the easiest way to look at this is what I mentioned earlier. Does the rule in which the kid was kicked off the team or dismissed from the team, was it specifically just for that sport and that specific sports athletes, or does it apply to the entire student body or athletic department as a whole? If a kid is kicked off a team because he didn't run hard to first base, clearly that's a team rule. The kid would not have to serve that suspension at his NAIA school. If he's kicked off the team because he fails a drug test that all of the athletes on campus have to pass, then he would have to serve that suspension at his NAIA school. So some tricks of the trade. When student athletes transfer mid-year, they open themselves up to being charged a second season of competition based on their previous participation. So let's hypothetically, kid competes for an NAIA school in the fall, in baseball, in accountable game, or even in an exhibition, then transfers to you guys and wants to compete in the spring, he's opening himself up to being charged a second season of competition. So if they just competed in scrimmages, we don't charge for scrimmages, right? So if they just competed in scrimmages, then the kid could come in and would be comfortable competing for you guys in the spring. He'd only be charged 1 season of competition. If it's an exhibition or a countable contest, then that's when this rule kicks in. There is one exception. It's for junior college kids that graduated and participated at their junior college, transfers to an NAIA school in the same sports season and is otherwise eligible. That kid would not be charged an additional season. So they actually have to graduate with an associate's degree from their junior college. If they graduate with an associate degree from a 4-year school, doesn't work. Has to be a 2-year school, a junior college. So then competitions after the transfer. Student must be certified as eligible to participate in the next season of competition, obviously, and this applies even for spring scrimmages where a student won't be charged for a season of competition. So let's go back to the baseball hypothetical. Competes at an NAIA school in the fall in a countable game or an exhibition, transfers to you guys. You guys understand you don't want to burn another season of competition, but you want him to compete in a couple of scrimmages that you guys have. He would have to meet the eligibility requirements as if he is going to be charged another season of competition. So FARs and registrars hopefully understand this. But even though he's not going to be charged for those scrimmage competitions, he would have to meet the eligibility requirements as if he was going to be charged. Just something to keep in mind. So medical hardships is our last slide here, and then we'll got about 5 minutes. So medical hardships, they come directly to Jack and myself. We have to look at them. Legislative Services makes those decisions black and white. They either meet our medical hardship requirements or they don't, right? And a medical hardship request only applies to season of competition. We get maybe one or two a month where a kid didn't compete, they submit a medical hardship and they say no competitions. In that case, we can't grant that medical hardship because the student wasn't charged a season of competition. They actually have to have been charged season of competition for us to grant it back. It does not grant back a term of attendance. Okay, that's a different process. You have to request an exception. Those are rarely granted by the NEC, but that's a different process. So these come directly to us. So it must involve an injury or illness which is beyond the control of the student. I've never seen one where it wasn't, where the student shot himself in the foot or something like that. But technically, if he did, we wouldn't be able to, if he did it on purpose, we wouldn't be able to grant that. It has to be outside their control, and it has to incapacitate the student from competing further during the sports season as verified by the attending physician within the sports season in question. So don't wait until, you get a kid, he tears his ulnar nerve, and you're like, well, we'll have the medical hardship stuff filled out. We'll send him to, he can get it filled out by his own doctor over the summer. Unless that doctor saw him during the sports season, we're not going to be able to grant that. You're going to have to request an exception in that instance. They have to be seen during the sport season in question by an MD or a DO, so not your athletic trainer, not a DPM, not a PA, not a nurse. Has to be an MD or a DO. They have to be seen during the season in question, and that doctor has to confirm on the medical hardship sheet that the kid was incapacitated for the remainder of the sports season. So we get these, the doctor writes, can return in a year. That's not going to be good enough. We actually, unfortunately, have to have at least a month in a year to determine if the kid is outside of the season of competition. And then what we do is we go to your guys' schedule and confirm that date, make sure the kid was incapacitated through the end of the season. So the big one here, a student cannot have participated in more contests or dates than 20% of the frequency of play limit. So, for example, baseball is 11. The other ones are kind of escaping me right now, but 20% of the frequency of play limits, those are in our handbook. They're on our websites all over the place. They compete in any more than that, it's a flat-out denial, and we have to deny it on its face. I got burned on this whenever I was playing back in the day. But if it's more than that, we have to deny it on its face. And unfortunately, if you request an exception with the NEC, they're not going to grant it either. We had a kid last year tore his so football, the max is 2. He tore his ACL in the opening kickoff of the third game. I had to deny it. They requested an exception to the hardship limits with the NEC, and unfortunately the NEC denied that as well. So it's a hard and fast rule. Once you hit that mark, you cannot get that season back. So scrimmages don't count in that contest date or in that limit, so they can compete in scrimmages, and those wouldn't count towards that 20% limit. The kid cannot be hurt in the last regular season competition or postseason competition, and competition after being determined incapacitated nullifies the hardship. So if we grant these as they come in. So if a kid gets hurt, you get everything taken care of. We grant it. He makes a miraculous recovery, plays in the last weekend. That would nullify that hardship. The kid would be charged for that season. And medical hardships are only applicable for intercollegiate competition. So if you have a track athlete, they're running in a race over the summer, and they get injured, and they get charged a season of competition. We cannot grant that back. Same thing with summer wood bat leagues. It has to be intercollegiate competition. The way the bylaw is written right now. So anything outside of intercollegiate, NCAA, NJCAA, NAIA, obviously, we can't grant those hardship for injuries suffered in those, and that includes international intercollegiate. So it has to be a domestic intercollegiate league in order for us to grant that season of competition back. So that's everything. You guys this is Legislative Services. This is all of our contact information. We sit at our computers and at the phones all day long. waiting to hear from you guys. Feel free to call us. It's what we do. A lot of times people call and they say, hey, sorry to bother you. Don't worry about it. That's what we're here for. You guys can call us with any question, anything that comes up. We're gonna answer it to the best of our ability. And if it is something that maybe it's a sport rule question or something that's not in our purview, we'll find the proper person to get you that answer. So feel free to call us. That's our direct number and our direct email. So those will come directly to us. So I don't see any questions. If anybody has any questions, we'll hang out here for a couple of minutes, see if anything throws up. But other than that, I really appreciate you guys sitting in. And if you guys have anything, feel free to give us a call and ask us any types of questions. So, like I said, we'll sit here for a minute. But if you guys don't have anything, feel free to log out, and we'll see you soon. And hopefully, you guys have a great spring sports season and no forfeits, right? So no forfeits. All right. Thank you guys so much. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar now. Again, feel free to contact us. We are here for you guys. If you guys want any of those, that collateral or anything, any of those pamphlets and handouts, if you guys don't have those, feel free to contact us. We'll get you those. And if you guys have any questions about anything this spring, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help. All right? Hope you guys all have a great spring season. Hope everything goes well, and we'll talk to you soon.